Yeah.
Jay, do you want to introduce your businesses and your little intro?
Yes. So hi, hello. My name is Jay. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the builder of Queer Cults. It is a blog, it is a community, it is a lot of things, but it's essentially for people to feel heard, seen, and valid. That is the tagline: vocal, visible, valid. So that's why I'm hosting this with Andrew through Queer Cult, this polyamory panel series, to help people feel exactly that, seen, heard, and valid in their experience with polyamory specifically. But Queer Cult deals with queer identities, neurodivergence, disability, anything that's marginalized under a heteropatriarchy, cis heteropatriarchy. I got this.
All
Cis
those things.
heteropatriarchy, capitalist bullshit. That's it. Okay. So yeah, welcome everyone who's here and who will be joining us in the recording after, viewing it. I can talk. I'm sorry. But I wanted to go through real quick that this is a brave space for you to come as you are and be as you need to be. So we welcome you to have your camera on or off. The chat box is always open, like I was saying before. And we will do our best to make sure everyone is heard and seen in the time that we have. If you need fidget toys, blankets, whatever, get cozy. And yeah, we will get started. Andrew, if you want to do a quick intro yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah. My name is Andrew. I use they, them pronouns. I help run a group called Queer Scouts, which is in Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor. We are centered on queerness and kink. And when it's not the pandemic, we run monthly meetups, which have been a blast. Hoping to get those started again once it's warm enough to gather outside. And one of the things I wanted to bring up at the beginning of this conversation specifically, which is when do we break up, is to, as much as possible, speak from your own experience, but also to be respectful, right? In every relationship, there are at least two people, and we want to respect the person talking, but also the people who aren't here to talk about themselves, try and anonymize when possible, and just, try and keep things civil, since this is going to be recorded and go up on the internet again eventually.
Yeah.
We're ready to dive in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So the reason I wanted to talk about this as a sort of next level polyamory concept is because I feel like early on the question is like, how do I meet people? I'm, interested in all these people, but they're all monogamous. There's that big struggle. Then you find your community, you start dating, and you get introduced to those polyamorous circles. And all of a sudden, at least in my experience, I wound up having flirting with too many people. I had more partners than I could responsibly manage. And so some of the things I want to talk about today are like sort of understanding our own limitations and what we do and don't have time and resources for, because while love may not be finite, the rest of our bodies generally are.
Yeah. We still live in a three-dimensional space.
And so kind of talking about how we make those decisions about when we need to break up, and if we don't need to break up, but we do need to maybe renegotiate the level of a relationship, and if we have time, how we go about doing that.
Yeah, awesome. And I would emphasize level, meaning like level of intimacy, because I try to stay away from hierarchical structures. Even if that means I still have an anchor partner and they are the person I make most of my life decisions with, that doesn't mean, my relationship with them is like valued more than my friendships or my, so All that being said, yeah, that sounds great. But do you want to start with maybe your experience with boundaries and figuring out your limits, and then we can transition into the when part, like the when to move back.
Yeah, I guess for me, it, like, at some point things really started taking off, and all of a sudden I realized that, like, I had a date every night for 2 weeks out, right? Because some people I'm seeing more than once a week, and other people I'm only seeing once a week, but then, you know, there's only so much time after 5 p.m. on a weeknight. And I guess another thing we could talk about here is like the sort of parallel poly versus kitchen table poly, but most of my relationships at that point were parallel. It was people who I wanted to see one-on-one. I didn't necessarily just want to get a big group of people to hang out with. And so I think the first thing for me was just kind of recognizing that I needed to also maintain time and space for myself, and I couldn't spend every single day seeing someone different, because then, you know, I'd never have alone time. I wouldn't have time to work on my hobbies or my projects.
Yep.
And so really cutting back on that, actually just like scheduling days for just me were important.
Yeah.
And taking time to just say, like, this is not a day that I'm available, even though I'm not seeing anyone.
Great. Actually, sorry to butt in, but
no,
that brings me back to our first session when we were talking about like often, or not often, but it can happen that when we are seeking external activity, especially with so many people intimately, that can often mean that there's like a red flag going off for us not dealing with our internal stuff. Like instead of therapy, we go get extra partners. That's kind of
definitely happened.
good.
I've been one of those extra partners, that's for sure.
I've been on both sides of the equation, okay?
Yeah.
And I've been in a situation where I wasn't doing it, but my partner was doing it, and that was really uncomfortable because I was the primary partner and they had zero time for me, and that was not okay. So like, you know, anyway, we can go back to your narrative. I just wanted to put that in there.
No, that's good. And so for me, like the first step really, because I was interested in all these people, was just having to take a step back and talk to each of them about what was realistic, and be like, I like you a lot, but what I have energy for is seeing you, you know, every other week, or, you know, one of my very first polyamorous partners, we met, and then started having a date night right after knitting night. And so we had once a week, we would both go to the same knitting group. And that was really nice because it was kind of convenient and contained, and I could multitask. But neither of us really had time for a lot of dates beyond that. And so that kind of neatly had its own constraint and container that worked really well for us.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love when connections can happen over shared activities, because like you said, it's that container that's already there. And it really helps when, again, clear communication, open, honest, frequent communication. When you have that container, and then you have, hey, these are my expectations with this relationship right now, where are you at? And you keep checking in, then there's no real risk in like hurting each other's feelings for not giving each other more time, or expecting more time from each other, because you've already laid it out and it's already the container's already there. So that's certainly, I love when that happens. It's very convenient. But it still requires, even when it's convenient, it still requires that upfront, honest, open communication. So just wanted to add that as well. Yeah, did you have any other thoughts
I
on?
mean, I do, but I think I'll hold some of them for later and make sure that other people
Yeah, love it.
can say things. Yeah.
Speaking of other people, I know Avery, you were mentioning you'd probably want to jump on. I want to open the space to you if you have anything to add right now.
Regarding what exactly the balancing? We casted a lot. We casted a large net, and I just want to make sure that
Kind of finding the conversation. So
Yeah,
definitely,
I think
where do you feel like moving?
yeah, if anything really is shiny for you, and from all the things that we talked about already.
Okay, awesome. So I would consider myself I have a hodgepodge of different types of relationships in my polycule. And some of them are like, how I modeled it is like, if you had, a concentric circle. I'm just gonna draw it out because I'm extra.
I love it.
Like,
Love
Let's do
it.
it.
Where I'm in the center, and like
Yeah.
those would be my most like involved logistical relationships. I don't have an inherent hierarchical structure, but hierarchy just kind of happens because if you are familiar with the relationship anarchy smorgasbord, it's
Yeah.
like how many things fit in this plate based on how compatible you are and in what ways are you compatible.
Yeah.
And the more ways in which we are compatible, the more items we have on our plate. And so that just naturally happens. It doesn't mean I love anyone any less or that they're less important to me. It's just that depending on how compatible we are. Like, I'm not going to want to have kids with every single one of the partners in my polycule. Because I wouldn't be compatible as co-parents with every single one of the partners I have in my polycule. That's just impossible, but I love them, and like maybe we can be co-creators, like or co-creatives or whatnot. But yeah, I wanted to touch on that, and that while hierarchy, it's a valid way to practice polyamory. It's just not how I prefer to.
Yeah.
But hierarchy does just happen. It's just not assigned and categorized.
Yeah.
I remember Andrew said earlier, oh yeah, I had a date every night. I also serially dated a few years ago, but I don't regret it. I think it's a great kind of learning experience because dating is kind of just tossing things at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it can be a weird, painful process. I wish somebody told me, like, practice healthy detachment while you're doing this. so your emotions don't go in a damn tizzy. But
that's real.
it was great to, like, it helped me kind of actively dating and making it a point to do so helped me realize, like, oh, I don't want a hierarchical structure. Oh, I do in fact enjoy relationship anarchy and relationship anarchy values. And it can, like, one's polycule can look like a hodgepodge of different relationships with different levels of logistical involvement,
Yeah.
depending on the compatibility, because people are complex. So anyway,
Yes.
that's kind of the shinies that stuck out to me.
Love it. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
I really love the analogy of the plate and the piling on. That like, oh God, is so vivid in my brain when you're talking about that, because that's exactly how I operate, honestly. And I really love that you share that, like, I don't necessarily need hierarchy in the like traditional sense, but it does happen naturally because of who you're like physically and temporally close to, and then the compatibility, that's the word, on top of that. So thank you. That's really great stuff to share. Shoot, there's something, oh, okay. So I feel like it needs to be said. I mean, it doesn't maybe need to be said, but I want to name it. A lot of the blunders that I have come across in dating too much, not knowing how to speak clearly about my needs when others are dating too much, and then when to break up, right? That's the point of today's session, is to talk more about when do we de-escalate the situation. All of that for me has come down to me not knowing myself. And I know we grow, right? We grow every day. And like Avery was saying, dating's kind of just like throwing the spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. So like there is a time and like a period of time where that exploration is needed. But all of it really came down to like not knowing myself, not knowing my needs. And then when I do finally know myself, I don't have the language yet developed, right? To be like, so I don't know how to express what I'm feeling, but I'm either frustrated because I don't have enough time with you, or I'm confused and scared and just like feeling this not clicking going on. And I don't want to like break up with you, but I also don't want to be as intimate as we are. And like, how do you take a step back from intimacy without slapping the person in the face? Because a lot of the time that feels like an attack if you're on the receiving end of it. So like, I think the shift that's happening, or at least that we're starting to see as we have these kinds of discussions, is like, how do we openly accept, radically accept that change happens? Change is going to happen. And, you know, yeah, what if you're in this really beautiful, intimate relationship with someone and then they decide that it's not what they're looking for anymore, but they still want you in their life? It's up to you to decide, okay, what can I handle? And is that something that I can grow into, right? It doesn't need to happen overnight, but can you grow into it? Can you still love this person in a new way? And see what happens. So I think, does anybody have a comment on like the language that's lacking? Because I think that's part of this.
I do, but I want to let other people jump in if they have thoughts as well.
Absolutely. Hi, Lang. Welcome. Yay.
Yeah. So one thing we talked about last session was growing our emotional vocabulary.
Yes.
And I think that totally goes along with it. One, like you were saying, someone spending too much time with other people. We hadn't even gotten to that point, right? But one of my partners was considering dating 2 more people on top of 5 already existing partners. And like 7 feels like the theoretical max to me if I want to see everyone once a week. So like that was like a scary place for me. And so what I did was I went to them and I said, hey, like, I respect your autonomy. I want you to do what makes you happy, but also here are my concerns. I'm worried. I'm scared that I won't get enough time to see you, that you having these other partners will come at the expense of what we have. And sometimes it's not even like that we need to change the level. We just need to kind of acknowledge that that might happen. And I think being honest with ourselves about what might happen, and also keeping that line of communication open with our partner, or, you know, feeling insecure or whatever, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And there was another thing that you said that I wanted to follow up on, but it's gone now.
I hate when that happens. Dang it, brains.
It happens a lot. I should take better notes. I was going to. I generally take pretty good notes, but I didn't write anything down this time.
That's okay. No worries. Maybe it'll come back. You never know.
Yeah. I guess one thing I want to jump back to. Oh, Avery, you have something you wanted to add. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
I raised my hand because I didn't want to disrupt. If you want to finish your thought, please do.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I heard something that Jay said, and that was, how can we love them in a new way? I don't know if any of y'all are Esther Perel fans by any chance. She's a couples psychotherapist from Belgium who is over like 30 some odd years of experience.
The infidelity one.
Yeah, I've read that book.
Yeah.
It's rethinking The State of Affairs, Rethinking Infidelity, and I'm in the middle of reading her book about sexual desire and long-term relationships. It's really good. I highly recommend reading either or both. Anyway, she all of her patients, I'll send some information to you. All of her patients are monogamous couples. Some of them were non-monogamous, but I think a lot of her tenets and the things she talks about can be applied to just any relationships in general, like romantic relationships in general. So, but all of her couples are multicultural, interracial. Some of them are queer, some of them are a heterosexual pairing, you know, all kinds of people that she has given couples therapy to. Something that she said before, excuse me, is you can have multiple relationships with the same person. In Rethinking Infidelity, talking about couples that you know, infidelity happens, but then they decide to work on their marriage or their partnership, their long-term partnership. They are now, and she said to them, you know, you are now entering your new marriage or your new relationship. There's a link in the chat that Andrew provided for the book. Anyway, but you can have multiple relationships with the same person. And there's another Tumblr post that I think ties into this. And love someone long term is to attend the funerals of who they used to be. Because we all change.
Wow.
And when you are with somebody in your 20s versus when you're with somebody in your 30s or your 40s, the relationship is probably not going to look the same. And even if you have the same partnership, your relationships are different with that person throughout that partnership, that bond. And so I think that loving them in a new way, it's like okay to have multiple relationships with the same person. And in fact, it's going to change, the dynamic's going to change depending on life.
Wow.
Things happen, circumstances change.
Ooh, I got sparkle fingers for that. My God. I got chills. Like, that was amazing.
Esther Perel is very good. I think she actually narrates her own audiobook.
Oh my God, I need
so,
it.
like, yeah, it's good.
Voice and accent. She's from Belgium and she's fluent in French.
I need it. I need it like yesterday.
It's wonderful. Yeah, but I think that's a really good point. And I think one of the things that we should acknowledge when we're thinking about when to break up and how to break up is like, we are all constantly changing. Like, my sexuality over the past decade has been fluid. My gender identity has been fluid. My values, my ethics have been fluid. I have definitely ended relationships with people because I felt like we were headed in different directions, just in terms of like what we wanted the world to look like.
Yeah.
And I think those are all valid reasons to break up.
Absolutely.
I think that would actually be a good question maybe to bring in for the group, is like, what are reasons that you've found compelling enough to modify or end a relationship? We've talked about time. We've talked about, you know, changes to the dynamic of the relationship as we age and grow. Avery, you don't need to raise your hand. If there's a silence, you can totally just jump in.
I'm not trying to like monopolize the conversation. Sorry. I just I had a relationship end because this was earlier last year. I keep forgetting it's 2022. So I found myself not drawn to spending time with them. Now, there were reasons for that, but ultimately I think if spending time with someone starts to feel in your body and your feelings like a chore, he wanted time with me. They wanted time with me. And I just didn't feel like giving it. I wanted to spend it either alone or with one of my other partners. And that just, to me, it's like when I don't want to make space, and have to spend quality time with the person. That's usually a really good indicator of some big change needs to happen, or just the termination of the partnership in question.
Yes. Oh my God. When you said it's starting to feel like a chore, I was like, I had that in my head as you were saying it. I'm like, resonates so deeply. Ow.
I also want to jump in for all of the future viewers on wherever we host this. This conversation is happening at the beginning of the 3rd year of the COVID pandemic. So all of our relationships have probably been affected by that in some way or another. I know mine have. And that definitely shifts the way that I've been feeling about this conversation, for sure.
Oh boy, do I can add to that one.
Oh.
So, little backstory, I was living in Michigan for about a decade. I moved there for school in 2012 and then just stayed because I loved it. And I met someone through a dance experience in Ohio. They lived local to Ohio, so it was a few hour drive, but it wasn't bad. And we started dating and it was beautiful. And then the pandemic hit, and for the almost 2 years that we dated, most of it was pandemic, and we saw each other in physical form, I think like 3 times maybe after that dance experience. So it wasn't a great time, and it's not to say that long distance isn't viable. Obviously, so many people do long distance every day, and for me, and the style of relationship that I thought we were having, that worked for me. Like, I love to see my people when I can see them, and yeah, it sucks to be apart, but like, there's a time and place, and it's okay. We have technology, we make it work. But even the technology was starting to kind of feel like a chore, because it felt like the burden of being away from my partner was so heavy that it was impeding on how I got to love her, and it started to fall apart. And there was a moment where she brought some stuff up about my living situation and how not knowing where I was going to be, because at the time I literally didn't know what was going to happen, because pandemic times, we didn't know if we were going to move back to Michigan, didn't know if we were going to stay in New York, didn't know if we were going to try California to live out by my brother in San Francisco. Like, we didn't know. And finally we figured out, actually after we broke up, that okay, I'll get to that in a second. I finally figured out that we're going to stay in New York. Actually, Cinder is going to come move out with us. I'm so excited. So like, cool, awesome new development. But at that time, we just didn't know, and she wasn't handling it well. And the burden of the distance was literally just suffocating the relationship, I guess. And so she was trying to say, I don't want to say that we're done, but I also don't want to say that this is okay. And I'm like, well, clearly these things keep coming up for you, and this is not something that I personally feel is a problem. So maybe it's time we do break up. Maybe it's the time. Like, it sucks and it was good and now it's not, and I love you, but maybe it's just time to stop. And she had to think about it, and at the time we did say, okay, let's put it on pause and pick things back up in the spring and see how we're feeling. And I'm pretty sure we're just done. Mm-hmm. It's got that vibe, which is unfortunate, because I still love her, in a way, not the same way, I don't think, anymore, but I still love her. And for me, I would have been fine with taking just a step back. I would have been okay with saying, okay, we're comet partners. Like, we come into each other's lives, and it's beautiful when it happens. And then when we're not together, it doesn't have to be so involved. I don't have to text you every day. I don't have to try to have online dates with you every month, like that kind of thing. But that's not the relationship style that she is compatible with. So that was my moment during the pandemic of like, oh, right, dynamics change, and this is more than enough reason to take the red flag and be like, all right, love you, bye. Like, so that's my little story about pandemic life, and how we figure out when to break up. I don't know if anybody wants to take the floor. Hi, Jess.
I'm gonna jump in real
Welcome.
quick.
Yeah, Andrew, go ahead.
Because I see we have a couple of new people, so I just want to go back over a little bit of the intro stuff. We are recording
Sounds good.
this. If you don't want to be recorded, you don't have to speak up. You don't have to have your video on. But if you would like to participate, you're more than welcome to. We encourage people to jump in with conversation. If you feel a little bit uncomfortable trying to like insert yourself in the conversation directly, go ahead and put a message in the chat, and I'll try and kind of create an opening for you. Yeah.
Or raise your
I
hand.
think
There's reaction buttons
Yep.
too. So
there was one thing you said, Jay, that I think is really important and really worth recognizing for everyone, which is that like we've been kind of looking at reasons we have broken up in the past, but you also mentioned you still loved a person but decided to end the relationship. And I think that's important, that like you can love somebody but recognize that you don't work as a couple or in that kind of relationship dynamic.
Yep.
And those are really hard, right? Where you still care for the person. I know that one of the times I did that, like we both liked each other, but we had some insurmountable lifestyle differences. And like I dated them for 6 months and it felt like it took 2 years to get over it.
no, I'm so sorry. Been there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Cinder.
Hi, Cinder.
So I wanted to kind of backtrack a little bit to the like not wanting to make space for someone as being a reason to break up with them. I've also I kind of wanted to hear people's opinion on going even a step further than that, and not just not wanting to make space for someone, but the prospect of having to go spend time with that person actually causing you a little bit of anxiety. Yeah, because I kind of just got out of that, where the prospect of I'm going to be expected to go do this thing, I'm going to be expected to behave in this way, and it was anxiety inducing. Like I didn't want to do it. I wanted to crawl up in my bed with my dog and just take a nap instead. And I just don't know if that's something that a lot of other people have experienced, or you know, what people's thoughts on that are.
Yeah, Jess, come on, jump right in.
Hi. So I've been meditating on this, your guys's, sorry, words are hard sometimes. I have brain damage, so.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, you're not alone. The whole beginning intro, I was like, what's that word? How do I say that? Like, so you're in good company.
Thank you. So I was thinking about what happens when we do become so escalated, when our nervous system becomes overwhelmed with having conversations. And as I, wrote about it for a while today, I came up with, and I was inspired by this really awesome hip hop artist, but she said, I will leverage my time better, which I really like. I thought that was good. So if there are things that are happening outside of the relationship that are causing distress inside the relationship, we can't always keep putting things off forever, especially if you have anxious attachment or your partner is anxiously attached. So we need to set aside time to not be stressed out by all the things that are currently keeping us from connecting, right? So that's one thing. And also, and I don't want to ask any pointed questions, feel free to not answer. I think perhaps what you were talking about could also be, is it about fear of the person not self-regulating? Like, are you getting anxious because of the topic, or are you getting anxious because of their previous behaviors?
Was that directed at me?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
It's Cinder.
Cinder. Okay.
I think the biggest reason that I was anxious in that situation specifically was because the relationship didn't seem to be progressing evenly. And so there was a greater expectation placed by my partner on me and my behavior and how things were going to evolve going forward than I was necessarily willing or able to bring to that. So it was a combination of things. It was a little bit of guilt, knowing that I don't think that I'm able to progress the same way you are, and anxiety because I'm not the kind of person who wants to hurt someone under any circumstances. So knowing that every time we interact, you're going to continue to be more attached to me, it makes me even more anxious, because then when I finally figure out if this is actually something I can go forward with and I break up, which it did end up happening, it's going to make you hurt even more, and I don't want to do that. And then it's just a spiral downward and downward where it's like,
So I guess, in my opinion, and also I don't practice regular poly, I practice relationship anarchy, but in my experience, when it comes to de-escalating connections, is you have to do it. You have to look at the way the other person is experiencing the world, and understand a little bit about how nervous systems work, and how some people can't regulate. I don't really subscribe to a lot of mental health diagnoses. I really just think it's a problem with the nervous system personally. But even like keeping in mind the features of how they respond, and making sure that when you're having that conversation, like I have a bean right now, my bean, I call them my beans. I have a bean right now, and they are very dysregulated. I am lucky to have gone through a whole year of really intensive therapy, which has helped me to ground easier. And my roommate brought up this idea when I had tension with them, that she was like, well, it doesn't really seem fair for you to ask them to be at your level and for them to ask you to be at their level, because you're at two different levels of growth.
Yeah.
And that's like a very like neutral and like non, like, you're not pointing fingers and saying like, you did this bad thing and I can't do it and all this stuff. I always try to approach de-escalation conversations like you were talking about, with like neutral language. So
Yeah, I think
And
that's
I can agree with that idea too. Mostly because that fits pretty nicely into my own personal worldview, that like everyone is only able to do what they're able to do at that time. Everyone's doing their best. Even if that best isn't very good in comparison to everyone else, it's their best. So it makes sense that like you can't ask somebody to necessarily be at your same level for something, because that just might not be where they are.
I really liked what you had to say, Jess. Another thing that has really helped me with those conversations, and I don't know if this is what you were feeling at all, Cinder, but one of my sources of anxiety in not wanting to hurt the other person is knowing that the conversation is going to be uncomfortable, and sort of also considering for myself the harm done, if we want to call it harm, by not having the conversation, right? So if I have the conversation, they're going to have feelings, and we can work through those feelings together during the conversation. But if I don't talk to them about it, and they think we're on a different level, and I am feeling like it's a chore or whatever else I might be feeling, anxiety, like that's not fair to them. That's not letting them make an informed decision. If they knew that I didn't feel the same way, they may choose to keep a relationship at two different levels, or they may want to find somebody who's on the same level. And you know, talking myself into like not giving them that choice is worse than like trying to protect them from the conversation.
It's a super good point.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because that's actually part of the thought process that led me to the decision to actually break up, was that like I can sit here and I can cry and be like, I don't want to hurt you, so I'm not going to have this conversation. But that's just going to make it, when it happens, even worse, because then there's going to be more time for that relationship to get tighter for that person, and like maybe not necessarily for me. So it's better to rip it off like a band-aid.
Right. I do want to emphasize too, sorry, just real quick, that it's not just keeping their best interests in mind, but it's for you too. Like, it's not fun to have to feel like you're doing chores, dating people. It's not fun to have this pent up anxiety stored in your body literally at all times, because this relationship is ever present. Like, you're in a relationship. So it's not just for the other person and ripping the band-aid off and taking care of them, but it's doing it for yourself too. And I think that needs to be a part of the conversation, because we kind of dismiss that just by default, because because we want to be caring about other people, but it's for us too. Avery, I saw your hand up, or Andrew, did you?
No, Avery, I was calling on Avery.
Okay.
One thing I liked what Jess said, and you know, you can't ask, and what Andrew said about, you know, people being on your level. I actually lived with, this was before I like learned from when I was actively dating. I'd been with the same person for 2.5, almost 3 years. And like, I thought that this relationship was like, I thought this guy was like husband bound, right? And we lived together. The pandemic happened. He lost a job. I was working remotely. So we were just all this time. And what the pandemic did was, it was a relationship like magnifier. So whatever happened just like came to the surface and kind of crept up, and we ended up terminating the relationship. I'd been through a lot of trauma that I was using psychotherapy to help heal, and I was doing a lot of EMDR. So my emotional regulation was getting a lot better. But I didn't really feel like he was trying to connect back. And I started spending more time with another person away from him. And I'm like, wow, this is telling, isn't it? But anyway, we broke up, and that was really difficult. And he wasn't at the same level of like emotional awareness, intelligence, skill, and regulation that I was. And that's okay, whether it's a matter of privilege, maybe they're not ready, maybe, you know, you can't afford therapy, whatever it is, like, so it hurts, because I didn't want it to end. I'm glad it did. But like at the time I just didn't want it to end. And but it was clear that it wasn't serving me anymore. And I think this touches back to when someone's not at your level or compatible with you at where they're at, wherever that is relative to you, and you realize it's not serving you anymore. When you do that kind of a lot of intensive therapy or some sort of mental health work or healing work, you start to think about yourself a lot. You start to realize, I can't pour from an empty cup. My energy is reserved for myself first, and that includes putting on my grown-up pants and terminating relationships that might not be serving me anymore, because they're not at a level where it's going to work for both people, but I know it's not working for me.
Yeah. That's, oh my God. Thank you for sharing. And thank you everyone for speaking on this topic. But that like, it's the whole concept of it not serving you, right? Like, we're conditioned in our society to not give a shit about ourselves, and in a really like weird way, because it's this like insidious dichotomy of we need independence and we have to have everything ourselves and make it ourselves and be, you know, the American dream. But then we're like conditioned to have these 9-to-5 jobs or whatever job it is, to always be beholden to a higher power, like a higher authority, and not really be able to make decisions for ourselves. And even when we do, it's like there's still someone pulling the strings of the marionette. So not that we don't have free will, but societally speaking,
Capitalism.
Sorry?
Capitalism.
Capitalism, literally. Thank you. Just one word sums it all up. So, you know, that being said, I love how Avery was bringing out and Jess, you were touching on this too, this emotional development, this intelligence and therapy that has brought skills to the surface, where we have tools and we can develop skills with them. I had that experience with DBT. I also love that you said you don't believe in a lot of these medical diagnoses, because I was diagnosed with BPD, which brought me to DBT, and I'm glad it happened, because like I needed that therapy to help me regulate and have good, healthy relationships. But I'm just autistic. I was in crisis mode my whole life, and like, anyway, so life-changing stuff. But when it comes to our relationship specifically, like understanding that you come first, your relationship with yourself comes first, and then you can, you know, go out like Avery with those circles, right? Like you're in the middle. There's a circle for a reason. You are the circle. You have to have a relationship with yourself before you can have a relationship happen.
The big revelation of when to break up is that we're all solo polyamorous. Or that we all should be.
Yeah, see,
Yes,
exactly.
yes.
There we go. So like I love that we're talking about this, because it's honestly a bit of a taboo subject. Like we do talk about spiritual health, and I'm seeing a lot of this like new age wave of self-care, right? Self-care is a buzzword and has been for a few years. But like there's a difference between self-care of like getting a facial and having a bath, and then doing the really dirty, gross self-care that deals with shadow work and like digging deep into your psyche and your emotions, understanding that you're more than those things, but you know, you got to work through it. So bringing all of that to your relationships, right? I love that we're talking about these levels of growth. Really, it comes down to levels of growth. And it's not that it's bad, right? If we're not matching, it's just that it is. And that's been a part of my emotional development, of understanding that we don't have to judge things that are just because they are. We don't have to apply meaning to them. We can just see them. And knowing that has genuinely helped me take those steps back and de-escalate situations and relationships. Because if they're not serving me, that's just what it is. It's not a judgment. It's just what is. And where do we go from there? Cinder, yeah.
So it's been mentioned a couple of times, like the concept of emotional development and like the general idea of like emotional intelligence. So we all seem to be on the same page that like not being on the same level on that can be a reason for termination of a relationship. But does anyone have thoughts on the possibility of that not being the reason? Like, do you think that you have to be at the same general level of emotional development as another person for a relationship to be successful? Because it doesn't matter how developed you are, you'll always be the less developed person to another person. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, it's a process. It's always ongoing. Do you think that it's possible to be with someone who might not necessarily be as grounded as you might have become in your own journey?
Yeah, Jess, if
Everybody
you want to
has
go
thoughts.
first.
Yeah, I want to do this in order. So Jess.
Okay. Yeah, so I think okay, so we all have our own personal boundaries, right? And I've recently realized that one of my most important personal boundaries is that people need to learn to self-regulate on their own, and that's not something I'm willing to walk through with them. They're, you know, that's for a professional, depending on your trauma background, right? So that, like, other than that, that I would segment into a connection with someone I'm going to be spending a lot of time with, potentially investing financial resources with, not necessarily nesting, but thinking about it. Like, so within RA, or at least the way I perceive it, there's a lot of compartmentalization. And we don't really walk into connections with an end goal. That's not the like intention at all. It's not like, oh, I'm trying to find my wife. Like, it's absolutely not that. It's more of like a meeting people, deciding whether or not they like are in alignment with your ideals. And if they seem to be in alignment, or they're interested in becoming aligned, then you can spend time with them and set, like, for me personally, because of my background, I set like a strictly non-romantic, there's a word for that, non-romantic and non-sexual limit for a while, because I don't know, I see you as a new human being in my life. I don't know what to expect from you. But, you know, and that can change with negotiation. And I find that, oh shit, I'm getting off track here. That can change with negotiation, but if the person, for me, is not willing to actually have an active conversation to negotiate for what they would like, or is not willing to actually tell me, well, this is what my end goal is. And then if they are willing to tell me that, then I filter that through my lens and my ideology and how I just know that I live in the world. And from there, you can make a better decision whether or not you want to keep someone around, or whether you can handle their the mismatch in growth. And also, oftentimes, I think this could be a misconception, so pardon me if it is. My perception in some poly circles is that the relationship is the goal, like a romantic or deeply connected relationship is the goal. And to me, that feels like so binary and confusing, because I'm very happy by myself. But you know, people are the icing on the cake. They're not the flour or the eggs. And I think that can kind of get in the way with determining whether or not you want to spend time with someone, and having relationships be the end goal, like romantic, amorous, whatever, relationships being the only end goal. And then also that being more important than just like a deeply intimate connection with somebody. Like, I hate to be super binary about this or gendered, but I love like teaching men how to have a best friend that's a woman, without ever giving in to wanting to be with them. And to me, I think it's an active chaos working against the patriarchy to do something like that. So, and it's confusing, and I have to walk them through it, but I think it's better for our culture to have people who understand that. And, you know, okay, I'm yabbling now, but yeah.
You're okay. No, that was great. Thank you so much for sharing all that. I something you said made it the spark in my brain about capacity. And Cinder, it related to your question. Absolutely. Yes, those relationships absolutely can happen. Blanc and I are an example of that, because we my current partner of almost 3 years now, have been, you know, in our own sprints of growth, and we haven't always matched the whole time, you know. But the point is that we are willing to do the growth and to hold grace for ourselves and for each other as we're doing it. At least we have enough emotional intelligence or capacity or whatever you want to call it to do that. And it hasn't been easy. Let me tell you, there have been times where it almost ended, and I'm glad we didn't, because now we were in a really beautiful place and it was all worth it. But like, there were those moments, and we each had to take stock. I had to take a break. I literally took a break. Like, I did the whole Rachel and Ross thing. I hate Friends, but that's the one reference that I'll ever use. So anyway, but so I want to say, like, yes, absolutely, it's possible. It's more than possible. But what is your capacity for yourself and for holding space for other people to do their growth in your presence as it affects you in real time, because it's going to affect you if you're in a relationship with them. And then, are you both willing to do the work? And I will say, and Blanca and I have talked about this before with people, so I think it's okay to share, but there was a time where he wasn't willing to do the work, and I had to talk to myself about my boundaries and what I needed out of that relationship. Because that was a moment where, like, is this the time to step back? I literally asked him, do you want to be primary partners? At the time we were using primary instead of anchor. Do you want to be primary partners? Because if you don't, if this is the way that I'm going to be treated in context of you thinking we're primary, I don't want it. Don't. We cannot be primary partners. I am more than happy to be casual partners who enjoy each other's company when it happens and we sleep together or whatever. But like, primary to me meant something very specific, and we had talked about it, and that question came out of me, and I'm honestly really proud of that, because a year ago Jay would have just swallowed all of it and continued on, and would have witnessed this cycle repeat itself over and over and over again, because that's just the way that I was conditioned, you know, right, to expect relationships to be like. So there came that moment where my growth was a little bigger than his, and we had to have a little bit of a back and forth. So I don't want to discourage people to be like, no, you can only date yourself, and that's the best as it's gonna get, because everyone's on a different level of emotional growth. No. But I do love what Jess said about alignment, right? Are you aligned? Are your goals, or are you willing to see each other's goals in relationship and work on yourselves so that you can work with each other? Cool. Andrew, you were next, and then Avery,
Nope,
right?
Avery's next.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Go ahead, Avery.
I'm keeping track.
Okay.
Yeah, you're
Oh, you're still
muted.
muted.
All right, cool. There we go. Now it's working. I would have been chill if Andrew did go, just because, like, it's pretty chill over here. So I want to address two things. One, what Jess said about polyamory, poly circles, and romantic relationships being the end goal. I'm sorry, whoever told you that. The point of poly is to be able to experience the entire spectrum of what a human relationship can look like that's deep and intimate. I have a hodgepodge of those. In my this is just my personal experience, is that I have a hodgepodge of those. Like, I am engaged, for example, but I also have 2 long distance relationships. One of them is turning out to be something that's probably going to turn into a nesting partnership in the future if that trajectory continues. And the other one, they're probably going to like remain kind of a satellite partner, satellite/comet partner. And then like I have some friendships, I wouldn't call them romantic partnerships, but we're still very emotionally intimate. and have been friends for a long time, and probably looks more like a queer platonic relationship, I would say, between me and the other person. But yeah, there's all these different kinds. Some of them are romantic, some of them are not romantic, but they're all very intimate, and they all run really deeply. And I love them all, and love can take many forms. And so I mean, like, that's just my view on poly. It's a very very objective experience for everybody. So I just want to, like, maybe bring that to light. And then also Cinder's question about could you have a relationship with somebody who's not at your level, emotional / developmentally. I'm gonna agree with, I think, what everybody else says, is that yes, and it depends, because I have so many varying types of relationships. It really depends. Like, I would not want somebody who's not at least where I'm at if they were interested in raising children with me, because I do want a multi-parent household of like 3 to 5 parents, including myself and a few children. I need somebody who's at least at my level if we're going to be raising a tiny human being that has big feelings, that doesn't have the brain power to process them. However, if this is somebody that is not interested in co-parenting with me, but we still share a very deep connection in other ways, I think there's a lot more room for like that gap. I don't know. There's more room for that to be able to come to fruition, still have a beautiful relationship with them, and or a beautiful friendship with them, and it would be great. And I have to also agree with Jay in that that gap can exist, but if one of you is stagnating and the other one is doing the work, even like, regardless, in my opinion, I don't know if it's as feasible if the gap is there, but it's because one of you is stagnating. If you're both putting in effort to, improve or regulate your emotions and communicate as adults, like, even if the gap is there, absolutely. But if somebody is not doing their part in trying, then I'm gonna have to head out on that. Because you don't have to be where I'm at, but if you're trying, and even if it's like a slower pace, that's okay, because the effort and like the fact that they're trying makes a huge difference.
Yeah. So I misinterpreted your question, I think, when you first asked it, but I want to talk about that too. Is like, we've been talking about different levels of emotional maturity, and I think everyone else has pretty much nailed it. I think the only thing I have to add there is, like, the bigger the gap is, the harder it gets. For instance, this age moves normally up to older ages, but like, there's always a year where I'm like, oh no, I could never date a 20-year-old. Oh no, I could never date a 23-year-old. Like, there's a maturity level, and like below that, and it doesn't have to be age related. Like, there are definitely people my age who are clearly just like their 20-year-old selves still, but like, I think there's always going to be a small gap, and the question is what you're okay with, because some people
Mhm.
may be comfortable with a wider gap and like working through that growth together, and other people may be in a place where they just don't have the patience for it. I feel like we could have a parallel conversation on this about like starter polyamory. It's like, who here did it a little bit and then said, not anymore, can't handle it, give up? Only experienced polyamorous people now. I need you to know how to handle your polyamorous emotions.
Yup. That's
So, like, there's
real.
lines, and those lines move. But what I was actually imagining at first was like a difference in level of intimacy, right? So also
Mhm.
relationships can have like one person really like, this is my, who I feel like is my primary partner, so the person I have the most emotional investment in, but then they might, you know, have a different feeling about the level of intensity or like what they're willing to commit to. And I think those can also coexist, and those relationships can be stable. Like a difference in where you are on the relationship escalator doesn't have to end a relationship, but it does need to be something that you both discuss and are on the same page about.
Mm. Yeah, that open, honest communication once again.
Mhm.
Or do we use radical honesty was
Yeah.
great.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, great. Well said. Cinder, I see you. I just want to add two sentences. There are times when mental health comes into play with all of this, and I don't want to erase that fact, because growth doesn't happen when you're in the dumps, right? Like that, it's honestly pretty impossible until you find a clearer sky. You do what you can to just survive, let alone improve yourself. So I just want to add that, because that did play a role in the relationship that I described with Blanc, and we've come a long way since then. So that's another privileged thing, right? Who has access to therapy, who has access to medication if they need it, who has access, you know, so that's, I just wanted to intersectionalize that. But Cinder, go ahead.
Basically, I just wanted to chime back in and say that the discourse I've heard is exactly what I was hoping I would hear, and the one common thing seems to be everyone mentioning willingness, where like, yeah, you don't necessarily have to be at the same place, but if you're willing to continue learning, then that makes a huge difference. So I didn't really have anything else to add. I just wanted to say yay. Everyone said I hope they would say.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, thank you. Jess, did you have your hand up? I just saw.
I'm trying to keep on topic. I think it's just questions about definitions, maybe. That was one thing that came to mind earlier, is I think it's really important to communicate like the definitions for words within connections too, because you know what someone says is like the word partner, right?
Right.
Like, how do you define partner? Is a partner like a best friend that you live with and are basically their boyfriend but don't fuck them? Like, or you know, like there's just like so many like there's so many like different levels to it, and like that's why I almost always revert back to that compartmentalization theory with the RA smorgasbord, because you can literally show it to somebody, you know, if they're confused about what's going on, and be like, what are you looking for in your friendly connections? What are you looking for in more serious connections? And then, you know, both people do that independently and see what is aligned. This is pretty topical because I'm literally doing that tonight with someone. But what do you know? Yeah, what do you know? But I do think it's important to define the terms, because expectations, without expectations being clearly stated, that is just like a huge source of resentment and anger, which could be with any kind of relationship. It's a, you know, general. And I wrote it down. We were talking about stagnation. Oh, okay. So with stagnation and they said they were, I'm sorry, I'm really bad with names. They said that it would cause them to kind of like leave if someone was stagnated, another person in their life. But what happens when you have an underlying fear that they're just kind of like saying they're going to change, Or you have trauma responses around someone saying they're going to work on themselves, and it turns into abuse. And that's like, I don't know how to get past that, and I don't know how other people handle that.
Oof, that is so real. I've personally have been in this situation a few times, and unfortunately, it comes down to how well developed your how do I want to say this? Your intuition, right? The gut feeling. It's hard to distinguish from anxiety over being wrong or something. Like I like that when you have someone in your life saying, I'm going to work on myself, I promise. And you can't tell if it's the gut feeling say, I don't believe you because I don't think that's going to happen, or is it the anxiety from trauma, right? Or I'm saying this wrong. Oh my God, hang on. So it's the gut response of, I don't believe you, I know this because my intuition is naming it, or is it the response of, well, this doesn't feel right, but I'm going to stick it out just to see if it's true. So it's really a matter of listening to our intuition, our inner voice of wisdom. And that only happens when you have enough cycles to develop your listening skills. And unfortunately, that often does involve shitty situations. I was in and out of 4 abusive relationships before I finally learned to listen to my intuition. And when my gut speaks, I don't believe you because that's bullshit. You should have changed by now. Like there's a grace period of like, okay, you say it the first time, let's work on it. Say it the second time, getting a little less patient. Let's still work on it. Third time, like I had to develop a strike system for myself. And then there were also levels of like how big the strikes were. Because, you know, cheating on me is much bigger than not doing the dishes, you know? So it's really developing a system for yourself, for what your boundaries are. And it's tricky. It's tricky. Even when you do listen to your gut, sometimes it doesn't work out. So just finding your inner voice of wisdom and not doubting it and not talking yourself out of it is a skill that we, like a muscle that we have to build. And yeah, I don't know what else to say about that, but I wanted real quickly, or yeah, Cinder, do you have something on that specifically?
Yes, I did. Something that I think can be really helpful for others in developing that ability is actually something that I used with the example I was talking about earlier. Support structure. Sometimes you can't necessarily trust your own intuition, and that's when having things like a therapist that you can discuss things with, or people who are close to you who are willing to put in the emotional labor to listen to you, can make a difference. I talked with Jay about that relationship a lot, and they were one of the people who helped me come to the decision that it did need to end. The other was my therapist. So I think that that's a big thing that can really help you with determining, is this a situation where I can believe that they're going to actually put in that effort to grow, or is it not? And that was just, sometimes you need other people. That's all there is to it. We can't be an island. So support structure, yay.
Yay, community. Thank you, Cinder, for saying that, because that's so vital. I was caught up in, you know, thinking of the self that I forgot that there's a whole system that plays a role. But so to continue, thank you. When we were talking about, actually, Jess, you were talking about it with defining like terms with people that you're seeing, even if it's just a friendship, right? I have found that in my experience of kink versus regular life, the communication that happens in kink society is so, I mean, not everybody participates in it, unfortunately, yet, but the language that's there is so much more developed to do that exactly, because consent is so important. Informed consent is so enthusiastic. Informed consent is so important to have safe, healthy relationships within kink. And I feel like because we're not taught these things at a young age, and then we have the generational trauma of not being taught those things at a young age, right? So it's like our own experience, but also generations before us. We don't think about vanilla situations needing that kind of communication. You kind of just go with the flow. There's societal expectations that are already in place. And if you're neurotypical, that's usually all you need. And yet still people fuck up. But like, I know, I'm saying sarcastically, like that's what people, all they need. But with neurodivergent people, it gets a little harder, right? And then when you're actually in the relationship, we just don't have that language there. We don't have the practice of saying, this is what I would like. What would you like? It's just not part of our culture, at least in this part of the world that I've seen. So I would love to see a shift where we bring the kink language, obviously leave the BDSM there, but the language about consent and about expectations to infiltrate the rest of our culture. And I think that's really interesting too, to understand kink culture, queer culture, alternative cultures, marginalized cultures are generally the ones doing the work. Ain't that just wild? That we,
Cutting edge.
what?
I think it's
We're
Like,
future.
people
We're the
get
future.
lazy.
right? They get comfortable because they don't have to do the work, because they're a part of the majority narrative or whatever. But people, because they're, and this is a double-edged sword or whatever, is even though they're in the majority culture or the narrative there, they're still suffering for being in it because they don't have the communication that we're talking about right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're on the outskirts looking in, and they also need this, you know? So it's just, it's really, I just had to make the observation because it's fascinating to me. Yeah, cool. I want to be mindful of time. It is 5 minutes to 8:30. I'm chill talking a little longer.
Good to stay longer too. If anybody wants to head out, feel free. We're going to keep the thing going and keep recording.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of thoughts at this point.
I love
They've
it.
really stacked up. The first thing I want to bring up is Wendy Newman on Medium, I'm going to share this in the chat, wrote an article on pink post-it notes, which, like Jay, you talked about the 3 strikes. The language that I've used about this is the pink post-it. Like, so it's not a red flag. It's not something you're like immediately deal breaker, get out of the bar, don't see this person ever again. The pink post-it notes can be little things, but like each time one happens, you can like put it up on the fridge and, you know, in a few months, look at that and see how many pink post-it notes are up there and how many pink post-it notes have changed. And so, like, I think in terms of not necessarily trusting someone to follow through with what they say, that might be one pink post-it note. There might be other different pink post-it notes, or like them repeating that behavior, right? And not demonstrating change. Could be multiple pink post-it notes all on its own. Another thing I really wanted to stress and reinforce is your boundaries are always valid, right? Like I think we've been talking about this, like, well, what if, you know, they're trying, but they can't, or they're not trying, but they say they are. It doesn't really matter at the end because it's what you can handle. So even if, you know, maybe they are putting in an effort, but it's not enough, or it doesn't look like enough to you. It's up to you to decide whether the work they're putting in is enough to keep you in that relationship. And I think that's an important angle too, is that. Also, circling back to Radical Honesty, the book that I got that from, I think is called Getting Real. I'll have to pull that up later, but it's 10 truth skills. And one of the things that she talks about, and another book that I've read in the past, Empowered Boundaries, talks about, is just repeating those boundaries or repeating those desires or restating what you need, not with an intention to manipulate or guilt or coerce the other person into changing their behavior, but to make sure that you're advocating for yourself. Again, a lot of these things seem like they're, a lot of what I'm bringing up seems to kind of tie into like being self-focused. Make sure that you're stating what you need. And in Getting Real, the author talks about how she had a higher libido and her partner was stressed out and a graduate student and had no libido, and she would just write no judgment, not trying to coerce the person, but every time she felt the desire to be sexually intimate, she would state it. And that took a lot of the sting out of it for her as they were working through that, and allowed her to be authentic to herself despite the external circumstances that were maybe keeping her from meeting her desires with her partner. I loved what Cinder had to say about trusting your support structures. I definitely have a number of people who are just kind of, they have a better gut sense. Their first impression of someone, they'll get sketched out and I won't see it at all. And if like 2 or 3 of them say, yeah, they give me a weird vibe, I'm done. I know from past experience that they have a good read on things, and I just need to take that opinion into account. This is a big tangent, but Jay, you brought up enthusiastic consent, and this has been on my mind for a while. This is a Slate article from March of last year. But they brought up something really interesting, which was that, and this is like totally derailing things, but we're past 8:30, so it's fine.
Well, before we jump into that, I do see Avery and Cinder, and I'm sure they have stuff connected to what was just talked about. So do we want to
we can do that
through that? Okay. Avery, you were first if you want to go.
Okay, sorry, I was just like playing with my mouse trying to unmute. And I'm also gonna lower my hand now. This was gonna hop all the way back to what Jay was saying about kink and regular life. But before I piggyback and like dive into that, I want to say that we all know healing is messy and gross, especially at first. I wish that I'd gotten like a terms of service and conditions and service when I was starting psychotherapy and EMDR. I really wish I got a terms of service on that so I could prepare for that kind of mess, but it is what it is. Anyway, so that aside, so you were specifically talking about, because I also am a member of the kink community, and so I wanted to add some commentary about that. We have to do the work because we're in a more precarious position with other people that requires trust.
Yep.
And there's really no other way to build trust than starting off with communication. I mean, other stuff as well, but communication is by far communication, and then informed consent and stuff. When you're participating in kink, some of these activities are inherently kind of dangerous.
Right.
And So you have to make sure that you have trust and boundaries communicated. And so we kind of have to do the work because of the space that we're in.
Right.
However, I do so that, and I also wanted to, you know, still piggyback off of when it comes to regular life, because we're in the kink community and we have to practice that, we translate it over to our relationships with people outside of that sphere. And the problem I've run into is that when I start dating, I get people who are intimidated by how direct I am. And
yeah, ow.
The song in my head that just popped up is, if you think I'm too much, go find less. But anyway,
Yes, love it.
DJ'd that song last month, I think. Anyway, so
oh, so good.
The problem I find with just normal vanilla life is people think that my directness is, they're intimidated by it, and that is fun. That's a whole lot of fun. Yeah, but I'm not gonna go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, we do the work. The alt cultures do the work because we kind of have to do the work. Also, when you're poly or just non-monogamous in general, when you're dealing with a lot of people, feelings compound, experiences, opinions, all of that compounds. So we also have to do that work because you have more people involved that you're intimate with on any level, friendship, romantic, sexual, like we're intimate with so many people simultaneously that we have to do that work because you have lots of opinions and thoughts and feelings and things to take into consideration and needs that are all different. You have to be skilled at doing that work in order to practice this stuff ethically.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
We're writing our own scripts. There's nothing pre-outlined for kink or pre-outlined for polyamorous, you know, non-amatonormative relationships. We don't have a choice. We can't follow the social norms. It's being made up as we go. So we've got to communicate.
Right. Oh my God. And I think that's where, at least in my experience, most of everything that's been bad, even in my monogamy, right? It's all come down to communication breakdown. Like every single time in friendship, we are social beings and we have so many different ways to communicate. But when we don't use our explicit words, whether it's signed or spoken or written, like there's so much, like we open the door to miscommunication. We open the door to breakdown. And I just really appreciate that we're talking about this, because it's in every part of our life, in every single part, not just polyamory. So anyway, Cinder, yes, you had your hand up.
Yes. Something that I wanted to mention, because we were talking briefly about the support structure again, was the fact that sometimes you need an outside observer to be able to objectively kind of give you some perspective, because you're in. So it's harder to know, am I overreacting to this? And I hate to say that, because you're not overreacting. Is your reaction big? Yes, but it's not overreacting. Off topic already. Sometimes it's helpful to have somebody who doesn't live in that scenario. They're not in your head, and look at, well, this is what's happening, that's what's happening, and give you a little bit of a different angle to say, is this actually something where this is something I need to be concerned about? The growth isn't happening. But yeah, like just the concept of the support structure can't be overstated. I also wanted to throw in there, because I thought this was funny while I was reading the closed captions as things were going, but sometimes it was translating the word kink as cake, and I thought it was hilarious.
We all love cake.
Love cake so much.
But I also, if I may, wanted to just quickly also the whole defining things and communication, and that even within the kink community, even people who are all members of the kink community, you can still have difficulties with communication.
Oh, sure.
To throw it all out there, that's why my marriage came to the end that it did, was because we both were speaking something that we thought the other was understanding, and we were not. And so it can't be overstated how important it is to define things and to make sure that you are communicating, because you can think that you're communicating in the same language, but that doesn't mean that you are.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. That's a really good point. Yeah, go ahead, Jess. Blah, words.
I
Sorry.
okay, so sorry, talking about communicating definitions. Do you guys always define to the other person you're connecting with, like what level they are? Like, do you always like tell them like, oh, you're my friend, or oh, you know, you're my crush or my squish? Like, do you have like, do you always do that? Is that part of your radical communication style, I guess? I don't know.
I stay away from those. What I
Me
tend to do is focus on what we're actually doing. Right. So I have one person that I'm seeing right now that we cook together, we have sex occasionally, we're good friends, and like that's what the communication is about. And then after we have that conversation about what we actually want, then we can together say, well, what do we want to call each other? Are we partners? Are we dating? Are we friends? Are we friends with benefits? And I feel like that's the secondary thing. So I feel like what I try to do is get away from the label as the starting point and move it to like, well, if we're trying to communicate it to other people where the stakes are lower, I don't care if I tell Jay that I'm friends with someone and Jay doesn't understand that friends means sometimes we have sex. That's okay. But if I communicate that to the person that I want to be friends with and sometimes have sex, and they don't know that, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
If I can interject,
Sure.
I actually have a somewhat counter mindset, and I think it has a lot to do with my own particular neurodivergence. I need parameters to operate inside of. So having something that defines a situation helps me with that. That's why I think this might be counter to everybody else here's mindset, but I like hierarchical polyamory because it gives me an understanding of, is this person my primary? Well, then in this situation, the expectation that I have taken on is a greater level of emotional energy that I can put into that situation. Whereas if someone is a satellite or tertiary, like, yes, I like spending time with you. I want you to be in my life. You are important to me. However, the expectation is not necessarily that I'm even going to communicate with you every day. And like I said, I think that's got a lot to do with my own personal neurodivergence. So like it helps me to have those titles because I understand where I fall in a scenario. And I would love to hear what other people's thoughts are on that, because I like I said, I think
I
it's
think that's totally valid.
Yeah. Do you think it, and I don't want to ask you to define your neurodivergence, but do you think it's because rules help you to understand how you're supposed to act, and how you're supposed to act is based on cultural cultural expectations?
yes.
Like, okay.
So I love rules
Yeah.
if they make sense to me. If they don't make sense to me, they're stupid and I will ignore them. But if it makes sense to me, it helps me to operate within set parameters. So when it's something is nebulous, it absolutely has the ability to just make me feel uncomfortable by default, which is why, like I said, I like having kind of like defined titles. I like having defined expectations. But yeah, I thank you for the question.
I have another question, if you're willing to answer. Like I said, don't feel obligated. So if it's rule-based, is it because you're trying to figure out how to navigate the social script, like what words you can use, like how you can move through that, what to expect, or and do you subscribe to like the typical cultural rules of definitions of things, I guess. I don't know.
I think that it's less necessarily to do with social expectation and more to do with my general energy level, I would say. I tend to have maybe a little bit less social energy to do things. So one of the things that helps me with having that level of compartmentalization, like primary, secondary, tertiary, is I understand that I don't have to necessarily put in the same amount of emotional and social energy into a tertiary as I would into a primary. Whereas with a primary, I'm going to put in the greater level of effort because, I mean, that's that agreement. And I think there might be a certain amount of social expectation to that because that's the agreement between myself and that other person. So the other aspect of that is I don't think it's based on what anything outside that relationship determines. It's based on myself and the other person. So that's where the definition of that comes from, which I guess makes things slightly messier, but that's a person-to-person basis. So it still falls in the same category of rules, at least in my brain, if it makes sense.
I'm just here to learn. Thank you for sharing.
That was such a cool exchange. Thank you both. Avery, you have your hand up. Do you want to go first?
Jay, your audio kind of went very
Oh,
low. But I heard you say my name, so I'm gonna unmute myself and assume that that's
Cool.
what you were attempting. So I do want to retort to Cinder about what you like hierarchical polyamory, and it doesn't have to make sense to anyone except you and the other human. So if it comes off messy to other people, it doesn't have to. As long as it's clear between you and the other human being that you're involved with. And everyone's consenting to whatever structure it is, that's it. You good. I mean, it should go without saying, but I just wanted to, I don't know. I wanted to tell you that even if it does come off as messy and nonsensical, as long as the other person's happy with it.
I mean, I'm messy and nonsensical, so it kind of comes with the territory.
That's that good sauce. I also wanted to respond to earlier about like you could communicate with the other person, but you know you're speaking in different languages to what you said earlier, and the degradation of your marriage. You have my compassion, by the way. As well at Jay as well, when you said earlier about your experience with relationships, you have my compassion as well, because I share that as well, and it's messy, it's gross. There's no care reaction in Zoom, so I'll just send it out into the ether instead. That works. But the other part of the communication puzzle piece is the comprehension and understanding.
Yeah.
It's like I can communicate, I can say the words, I can shout my feelings from the damn rooftops, but if it doesn't land the way that it needs to land, I'm speaking to a brick wall. I may as well go talk to a plant who's going to benefit from all the air coming out of my mouth if the comprehension and understanding don't hit. But yeah, that's what I wanted to add to the speaking different languages. The comprehension, understanding, the translation need to also take place. I kind of shovel that into the communication umbrella, but I understand how that can also kind of people think that communication is constantly talking, and I'm like, no, you have to understand, empathize, and comprehend what the other person's saying, the other people are saying. And then I also wanted to touch on what you said about needing, and just everyone in general talking about the importance, Cinder and Jess especially, about and Andrew, about like needing an outside, like your support network, outside of whatever relationship is having whatever issue. How it's good to consult like a trusted person, a therapist, whatever, about these kinds of things. That's something that I think we do a good job of in things like relationship anarchy and ethical non-monogamy. But the problem that I've had with asking people about my, for relationship advice is when I hear rhetoric from toxic monogamy culture's roots,
Yep.
Where your partner is your friend, your best friend, your confidant, your co-parent, this one person is basically everything to you. You can't really seek that outside counsel in that relationship structure. And the problem that I've had dating people who aren't experienced enough or informed enough in polyamory is that they're still stuck in this toxic monogamy culture mindset. Like they can philosophically and agree with poly and how it works, but you're conditioned and socialized into operating in this sphere of toxic monogamy culture. And I've spent a lot of time breaking the chains of that I don't even know how to operate in that sphere anymore. It's all Greek to me now. But I have some people in my polycule who still have some residual monogamy mindset things going on, and with a support network and like me practicing the type of polyamory that I do, that even varies between me and my other partners, like it's really hard for them to like, well, I wanted to talk to you about it, and I'm like, oh, I talked to my best friend about it, or I talked to so and so about it, or I talked to my therapist about it, and they I get met with some confusion here and there when I do admit that I consult my support network of friends, of partners, of my therapist, or whatever.
I'm gonna jump in real quick.
Yeah.
Something that I've found as a pitfall that I've been correcting recently is it can sometimes be asking too much of current partners to process new partners or each other with you. Like talking to one of my partners about issues I'm having with someone else isn't necessarily fair to people you're dating. And so I have started shifting away from that and focused more on talking to polyamorous people that I'm friends with about some of those challenges.
And this is why having like friends is also important. This is I just mean like your support network in general. It could be your polycule, it could be your friends, it could be anyone in between, like just outside parties in general. Some people are fine with that, some people are not. I don't really go into detail about relationship gunk too often I don't do it with everybody at all. But no, I totally agree with what you're saying, and that's a personal boundary thing that should always be respected.
Yeah, absolutely.
So am I understanding you correctly when you say that you've had people who have been surprised that you've talked with people outside the relationship about the relationship?
Sometimes, like I've gotten accused of like, why are you telling people our business? And I'm like, well, what are my friends are we not supposed to talk to each other about these kinds of things? Like it's a product of toxic monogamy culture. I can't, I don't know what else it is.
No, I completely agree. 100%. That's what it is.
I'm over here like I tell my therapist about literally everything. So the fact that somebody would be mad about me telling like my therapist about something,
you pay the therapist for that. They're there to hear everything.
Literally everything.
My therapist knows me better than any other human being on the face of the planet at this point, because she's heard every single dirty detail about me.
My fiance also knows a lot of things. I can't, they know too much. So does but like my fiance also knows too much. I do tend to talk to them about a lot of things, not every single little bit, but like on a need to know very specific things basis. And I don't always mention names. I don't always disclose like those kinds of details, but they do know a lot. And I also think it helps inform them of, this is the type of life partner I'm going to be walking through like different relationship situations. And you know, they have the space to help me process these things, because that's something that they like doing, which is cool.
I will say on the flip side of that, as we're coming to a close, because I don't want to go past 9 p.m. But sorry, cut you off. But I wanted to add, like, to the flip side, since it came up, like, there's another red flag for me, or like a pink sticky note that turns to a red flag really fast, is when my partner either absent-mindedly or purposefully withholds information that is relevant, like when it comes to exploring new relationships, or they had something to, like, I don't gatekeep exactly on it. Typically I'm only upset about the ones when it comes down to exploring relationships with other people. Like if they have something go wrong with their mom, I just want to be of support. So that's not like, I'm not going to penalize them for not telling me that. But if it has anything to do that directly impacts me, if they're ashamed of it because it directly impacts me, or you know, there's something going on with their relationship that directly impacts, like, don't withhold information. It doesn't feel good. And then on top of that, it can also just start problems in general. So that's another thing of like, do we take a step back? Do we have a really candid conversation about this? And if it happens again, then we take a step back. Like, just to keep in theme with tonight's topic. But that all being said, do we have any like reflections or last minute comments, questions? We've got 5 minutes to do the thing. Cinder, is that a new hand?
Yes, it is. I keep trying to take my hand down when I'm done.
I just wanted to be sure. Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to toss back to the it was mentioned like communication versus comprehension.
Yeah.
And as soon as that came up, my brain went to intention versus impact, and how that can have a big effect on that as well with the whole communicating thing. Like, beyond whether or not you two are speaking the same language, it also matters that you keep in mind the impact of the things that you say, because you might say something and it's completely innocent, but that doesn't mean that your partner, your friend, your person is going to take it that way. And so I don't know, it clicked in my head when the comprehension versus communication thing, like, I just wanted to make sure I threw that out there because it felt important.
Yeah, thank you. I genuinely super appreciated that whole tangent that we took about comprehension, because like oh, actually, the one comment I wanted to put in on that, that's another thing that I feel like marginalized people do, is we go past the middle point for comprehension. We try very hard to communicate the way the other person is communicating, so that we understand their point of view, and we have extra empathy in that way to make sure everyone is on the same page, and it often feels like it's not reciprocated. So if anyone's watching this and they understand that they're not doing the work, here's your signal to get on that. But also, if you are the person doing the work and you are going past the middle ground, I just want you to not feel alone, because that's super common in the circles that I keep surrounding communication and comprehension. That being said, I don't want to close the floor completely. Do we have any other comments before we wrap up? Anything?
Viewer? Is that I love you, Jay. You are fantastic.
I love you too. Thank you. Y'all are amazing. I'm so glad we could be here together. Thank you so fucking much for contributing to this space. Andrew and I are just holding a container, and wanting to see what pours in. So thank you for pouring your shiny beautifulness into this space and exploring these harder topics. Harder. They're not as discussed as most. So Avery, did I see your hand? I'm sorry. I think before we did that little, okay. But yes, thank you so much. And Andrew, again, thank you for wanting to make this project happen with me.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put some links in the chat right now. So this event, of course, is free because we wanted to keep it accessible. If you feel so inclined and are able to give a donation, we will greatly and gratefully accept that. So, but obviously, absolutely no obligation. I also put in some links for contacting me outside of the space. I do run peer support sessions, and I am a life coach. So those are two different things. There's links you can read about it. What else was there? Yeah, and then my socials, if you want to do a follow, if you haven't already. But other than that, Andrew, do you have anything else?
Yeah, we should boost. This is a series.
Yes.
If you want to go back and watch the first one, that was Polyamory Basics. We talked a little bit more in detail about things like labels, hierarchical poly versus non-hierarchical, and defining terms. The next topic, I believe, is going to be about polyamory and cohabiting. So living together, short-term or long-term, renting, what buying a house is like. That's something I am in the process of as a polyamorous person right now. So if you have interest in that, that'll be the February topic. And Jay, do you know the date? I know we moved it a little bit.
Yeah, no, that'll be on the third Monday, so on the 21st.
Okay, February 21st.
Yep. And I did, in case y'all wanted to copy paste, I did put the link into the first session, if that interests you at all.
I'm mostly sad I wasn't there for the first session.
I know, me too. But that's okay. You're here now, so it's fine. Whatever. But yeah, it's 9 o'clock. So
Yeah, we'll stop the recording and
yeah, thank you so much.